자, 두 번째 발표하실 분은 시카고 대학교에서 오셨습니다. 그레노블 교수이십니다. 발표 제목은 저 북극지방이네요. 북극지방의 언어 활력과 지속 가능성, 선주민 언어 전망이라는 제목을 가지고 발표하시겠습니다.
Thank you very much for the invitation to be here, and thank you for staying for my talk and coming today. It's really an honor to come and meet you all and hear about all the work that you're doing here on Jeju Island, and it's very exciting for me. I've already learned a lot from Dr. Lee, who was wonderfully laid out the situation here, and from Dr. Salabank, who's laid out the introduction, really, which will serve as a basis for what I'm going to talk about. Can we bring up my slides? So, this is me. So, what I want to talk about today is give you an overview, an introduction to the Arctic, where I have been working for approximately 20 years, and I'm going to talk about the things that I have learned there. Then I'm going to talk about some different motivations for working on languages, using them, some of the opportunities and challenges that my colleagues in the Arctic have faced, and then I want to give some specific examples of measures that one can use to revitalize. First of all, I want to thank all the sponsors for my research. I'm not talking about my specific research today, but I've been working in Greenland for a little over 10 years and elsewhere in the Arctic for about 20 years in Siberia. And it's really thanks to sponsors that I've been able to meet people and learn what they are doing, and that's what I'm presenting you today. I'm also going to be giving you a bunch of maps about the Arctic. It's kind of a place that if you haven't been, you might not know much about. This is my view of the world. And so I don't know if you can parse this. So we have the North Pole, and Greenland is here. And then this is Russia here. We're going to look at some more maps. Since I have come to Jeju, people have been apologizing to me for the bad weather here and how cold it is. And all I can do is laugh, since this is where I spend my time. And it's really important to think of the Arctic as a region. You'll see why in the next slides. So if we look here, you can see, first of all, that blue line is the Arctic Circle, and the red line is the Arctic as defined by the Arctic Monitoring Association. The majority of the people who are in the Arctic live above the red line, but there are some who live above the blue line. And the colors here represent different language families, and this is a really critical thing for understanding what happens in the Arctic. So we're going to go to the places where the blue languages are, where the brown, and the yellow. These are all really important, but one thing to understand is that in this area, which is a vast territory, there are just very few language families. And so people feel a strong sense of belonging with one another. Also, the conditions are very much the same. They're different in local ways, but there's a lot of cold. The sun in the far north doesn't set in the summer, and it doesn't rise in the winter, so you have long periods of constant sunlight, you have long periods of darkness, and people have some shared, some commonality in their experiences and how they live. So to give you a sense, to give you a sense of where we are, and this is where I've been spending the last couple of summers. So we're down here now. You recognize this. So I'm up in Yakutsk, which is in the same time zone. Anadyr, which is a 3-hour difference. Just to get a sense, Moscow is over here. Just to get a sense of the distance, it's 6 time zones from Moscow to Yakutsk and 9 time zones from Moscow to Anadyr. So we are talking, sorry. There we go. So we're talking about a huge territory, and you can see that this just gives you one sense of the Arctic. If you think back to that map, I think we have another one. Let's go back to this. If you think back to the map here, you can see this part where it's green of Russia. That's where Anadyr is. It's right up next to Alaska. And you can see that these people who live here are much closer to Japan and to Korea than they are to Moscow. So this really affects their identity, who they're engaged with in a daily way, and how they see themselves. Despite this huge area, people move around. And so there are people living in different regions. And you can't see it very well. Pay attention to this area, which is where Dolgan is spoken. And up here where Yakutsk is Sakha. So let's look at that. And so here we are. In this Arctic region, we have 8 different Arctic nation states. The population of the whole Arctic is approximately 4 million, and 12.5% are indigenous. So one of the questions really is how many indigenous groups and how many indigenous languages? We've been talking about numbers. Dr. Lee presented some numbers on Jeju language. We always fixate on numbers, but the fact is counting is really, really tricky. So how many languages? 40, 50, as many as 89, depending on how you count. And I think this is an issue you have here in Jeju. Do you count Jeju as a dialect of Korean? Is Jeju Korean, or is Jeju a separate language, right? So the counting is very complicated and political. So here's a better map in terms of the languages. So the one I'm interested in here is Dolgan versus Sakha. And we will come here, it's hard to, yeah. So we'll look at Scandinavian and Sami languages too. So is there one Sami language or 10? Is there one Inuit language or 9 or 23? Is there 1 or 2 Dolgan and Sakha languages? These are really important questions. So the blue here is the Yupik Inuit languages. People move from Alaska over to the coast of Siberia all the way around to Greenland. You can say that there's 23 different languages, or you can say that there's 1. Same thing with Sami, same thing with Dolgan and Sakha, a little different. So Sakha is a majority language in the Republic of Sakha. It's spoken by about 350,000 people. It's also been in contact with Mongolian. It has 450,000 people. It has official status. Dolgan has about maybe 1,000 people, and most of them live in that separate area. They aren't in contact with Sakha. The Russian government and the Soviet government before it classified them as a single language, with the result being that there's very little work done on Dolgan and very few people know much about it. They're just told to speak Sakha. So this is a problem because actually, as it turns out, Dolgan is quite distinct. The people have lived far away from the Sakha speakers. There's contact with a different language, Evenki, and they evolve separately. But officially, they are treated as a single language. Here's the case of Sami. Sorry, this is in Norwegian. This is a Sami map of the Sami languages, and there are 10. Of these, the only one that's really robustly spoken is the number 5, Northern Sami, where there's a fairly large number of Sami. But this is a statement from the Sami political program from 1986, and the Sami Council still says this when it suits them. It says, we are one Sami people, we have one language, a shared history. So there's different reasons for counting differently. If you look at the linguistic differences, those are different languages and they aren't mutually intelligible. And in fact, I've heard speakers of one Sami language criticize the North Sami because they're powerful and the materials are produced in North Sami. Whereas when the Sami want to say, we're strong, we're united, there's a lot of us, we matter, they unite the language. So that at some level, this is their decision. But my point is that this counting is also political. Depends on what you want to do. So when we talk about how many languages or even the vitality, I don't always know. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the stress factors that are shared in the Arctic that have caused changes in the language, and then talk about well-being, which is yet another reason to think about language maintenance, language use, and revitalization. Some of these will be very familiar to you. There's a lot of historical trauma. All of the indigenous people in the Arctic were colonized. They're colonized by different governments. The colonizers acted remarkably similarly. It's a very interesting situation. So they have the historical trauma of colonization, and they are still living under different governments. They also were the children, in many cases, in the Soviet Union, in the US, in Canada, and the Sami children in Scandinavia were forcibly taken from their parents and put into boarding, or often called residential schools. They were forced not to learn their language, but to speak the majority language. They were punished. They suffered a lot, and they also were removed from their homes, so they lost ties with their communities. Because the people were directly involved in World War II, there's still a lot of trauma. I've met a lot of people who have stories about World War II. Even if you pick that place in Anadyr, people were sent from Anadyr by the Soviet government to fight against Germany, Nazi Germany. So people, they lost a lot of the men. People starved. It was a very, very bad time. More modern times, one of the big things that's causing a lot of stress in the Arctic and among the indigenous people is climate change. They are seeing the way that they live change very rapidly. There's a polar amplification effect, which means that we've seen a lot of sea ice melting, traditional hunting has changed, fishing has changed because there's new fish in the region and old fish aren't there. Permafrost is melting. There's a lot of flooding or very heavy snowfall. That's forcing people to move into cities. Dr. Lee this morning already talked about some of the issues of living in cities, and this is what we find with indigenous people, that they get lost in the cities. They don't have a sense of community because they are outnumbered. Meanwhile, we have lots of migrations in the Arctic as the land opens up. If you remember that coastline, all the sea ice is melting, and so the governments are sending in people, including military. There's a strategic zone there. There's a trade route opening up. If we go back to the maps, maybe you don't care about maps, but I always think it's really interesting. Let's go back. Well, actually, let's go. This one. This is a good one. This whole area up to Anadyr was locked in by ice. But now it's opening up, so in particular the Chinese are sending up boats to trade. But this is an influx of a different population into the region, and it's changing the dynamics for local people on the ground. So one of the other things that we find is that language is an important piece of well-being, and I find that this is one of the more compelling reasons for people to use their language and have connections with their language and their cultural heritage. This is a model of well-being that says that people have resources, psychological, social, and physical resources, and they also have challenges, same thing, social, psychological, and physical, and the idea is that they are in balance, that well-being is when you meet challenges, you have the resources to deal with them. And when those resources are out of whack with the challenges, we all have challenges, but we need the resources. So as I say, climate change is a challenge. Do we have the resources? But in terms of psychological, social, and physical well-being as a whole, we need resources, and language is an important one of them. So this is something that I think is just really useful to keep in mind in thinking about why we revitalize. So we have found studies among indigenous peoples, in particular in the Arctic and Australia, have shown some very strong connections between language and improved mental health. So lower alcohol and drug usage, where communities use their language and have access to their language, lower suicide rates, and lower poor health, lower indicators of poor health, so lower diabetes rates, lower heart disease rates, lower blood pressure. I included a list of references with the slides because I think it's interesting to look at that, and these are the kinds of issues that are very compelling for governments when you want to leverage government support for language. So we have a nexus. This is based on things in the Arctic, interviews and surveys with Arctic peoples about what they care about for well-being, and language retention, cultural vitality, cultural well-being, sense of belonging are all critical, as are access to nature, cultural autonomy, control of one's fate. And so these are the sort of issues that we think about as we think about how to support people in the Arctic and other places, what issues indigenous peoples face. So I want to talk a little bit, just a couple of slides, about how Arctic peoples have been leveraging political support to help their languages and the kinds of things that they have done. The Arctic is loosely organized around an Arctic Council. It doesn't have legal authority, but it has advisory status. And the 8 member states are voting members, and there are permanent participants who are the indigenous people. A few years ago, they set to go out for a project for promoting languages. And to me, this is a really compelling project. It's an example of how the indigenous people themselves came together and decided that the thing they wanted to work on was their languages. They didn't pick climate change, they didn't pick labor, they picked language. Really interesting. I worked for them, they hired me, I worked for them for 2 years, and here's a couple of the activists who are from different places. Puyu is from Greenland, and he speaks fluently, and Pablo Solanjiga is from Russia. He does not speak his heritage language at all. They came up with a project which they called Assessing, Monitoring, and Promoting Languages, and I wanted to just flag their key findings of what was necessary. One is they felt they needed good assessment metrics. And I think that that's an important thing if you care about numbers and you care about identifying if you have those adult speakers that Julia was talking about. I know that Jeju speakers, we saw the UNESCO data, are quite old. However, I've met younger Jeju speakers since I've been here. So how do they fit in and how do you use them? This group particularly called for an active engagement of the communities to work with policymakers and international organizations. This would be a bottom-up and top-down approach, and a very urgent need for teacher training and the creation of pedagogical materials. So those were the priorities that they identified, and I think that's useful because they've looked hard at languages. So some of the problems that have emerged, I wanted to flag a couple. I knew that Julia was going to flag some others. But some of the problems that we have when we start doing language work. One is that linguists, who are very fixated on documentation, tend to record the older speakers, who they tend to think of as being very fluent. And as a result, they valorize the language spoken by the older speakers only, as if that's the real language. But who is really the expert in the language community? Who speaks the real language? My grandmother does not like the way I speak English. I was raised in a monolingual English-speaking household, but my grandmother would correct my English, mainly because I was always younger than my grandmother, and so I spoke differently. So this language change is an important thing. In many Arctic communities, elders argue against youth speaking the language. This is a little weirdly written, but they say that the young people speak badly, they have an accent, they make mistakes, they mix in the colonizing language, they use too much English, or they use too much Danish, or whoever the colonizers were. So they're saying that they aren't speaking the pure language. They don't speak the real language. This means that the net result is that the young people are discouraged from speaking their language because they're told that they can't speak. And what we want, if we want people to speak the language, they need to use it. They need to use it without being told that they're bad speakers. As soon as they are humiliated with language shaming, people stop speaking. So, in reality, what we find in communities that are bilingual or monolingual with a lot of language shift, we see that young people speak very, very differently than older people. And if you want the language used, you have to have room for that. I'm not sure if you can follow this slide, but we have Danayan, which has about 50 speakers. In standard Danayan, you get a suffix, you get a root and a lot of suffixes. So number 1 means I will see you again. That's a single word, and the suffixes can't stand independently. However, the young people are speaking a kind of Creole. They mostly speak English, and so not surprisingly, the language has been restructured, and instead of suffixes, you have a single word. Monomorphemic words, so one word, one meaning. So you get a word for I, as in English. You get a word for you. You get a word for, again, see, and then you get a future marker, like will, at the end. So the structure, the word order is different, but it's much more like English than the language. Sort of the point of this is, if you want younger people to be speaking, you might have to accept that they may speak more like this than like this. So what matters? Is it that the language is used at all, or is it used the old way? And this gets to Julia's point about the traditional uses of language sometimes can be the enemy of the language moving forward. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of programs that are happening in the Arctic. One of the things that, and I keep talking about the Arctic as a region because people are finding it really important to share best practices, to share what works as programs, and also to have some conversations about what hasn't worked. First of all, the silent speakers and facing psychological barriers. This is a program that Jana Juuso, who is a Sami speaker living in Norway, put together. She realized that people who are learning the language are often so afraid to speak that they don't speak. So she has workshops where people learn how to overcome that. She's written a couple of books. Unfortunately, they're in Norwegian, Sami, and Swedish. But the idea was so popular that she was brought into First Nations people in Canada, and a manual has been translated in English about how to get what she calls her silent speakers. They understand, they have some language, but they're afraid to use it, to work through those, these are adult speakers, to work through those psychological barriers to get them to speak, that's the main goal. A second program that I think is really interesting, and I think it's pretty easy to adopt, is the language ambassadors. It began with the Sami in Norway, the North Sami, and it's also spread to Canada, but used by the Gwich'en. And the Sami youth, so they tend to be teenagers, maybe 20, they agree to speak Sami. And they have these buttons here. These are 3 different Sami languages here. They have buttons and bracelets that they give out. And they work in particular with young people in the schools. They go in and they make an agreement just to use Sami. However, they do it a lot on Facebook and Twitter, just to create spaces where you can use Sami with mistakes or without mistakes. And they've enlisted a lot of people. They are very, very enthusiastic about it. And their commitment is to use Sami. And that's the idea, just use Sami. And it's just young people, so it makes it kind of cool or exciting to do it. And the elders aren't involved, so they aren't being criticized. Another model, Julia talked about the language nest model that we see in Hawaii and New Zealand, where languages are used starting in the preschools up through the schools, but a more modest version is the family nest model, which has been adopted a lot in the Arctic. And the idea is that a family commits to using the language, speaking it, and maybe they invite extended relatives or close friends. They come over for the evening and sit in the home, sit around the dinner table, whatever is the place where they would normally be talking, and they use that language. the idea is that there's a very low stress environment. It's not a public place, it's the home. To come together and speak. It builds up language use in the home, and it actually has this huge advantage of having really no work involved and no cost. Many people in the Arctic think, oh, we need to create language materials, we need dictionaries, we need grammars in order to teach in the schools, but that costs money. The language nests don't cost any money. So this is one advantage. There's a very popular program in Alaska that I never hear about outside of Alaska called Where Are Your Keys? And I bring this one to your attention because people don't know much about it. They have a nice website which is all in English, but there's lots of people here who know lots of English. And Where Are Your Keys is a group that people come together. They have in particular summer internships and summer programs. And their emphasis is getting a project going in the summer, getting the community involved so that they come together and commit during this time in the summer to have camps where they use language. You can see that there's a lot of kind of methods that we see in a traditional school system, but it's been a very successful and very popular program in Alaska to get especially young people involved and get the community to start committing to speaking the language. So I promised you some references on well-being. And finally, I want to thank the team I've been working with for the last couple of years to talk about and learn about language vitality and revitalization in the Arctic. This is a team from Sakha and further north, and there's a couple of non-Sakha people. There's one man for some diversity. He is actually Catalan, and there's one other American. So one of the things that's great about this project, besides we're working with women, is Yudmila is actually invited me to work with them, and we're working together to understand what's going on with the languages and how we can best work to support them. So thank you very much.
감사합니다. 지금까지 시카고 대학에서 오신 그레노블 교수님의 그 북극권에 분포되어 있는 8개 나라인가요? 그 8개 나라의 선주민, 토착 화자들의 그 사미족의 언어를 어떻게 소멸되어 가고 있고 또 그걸 어떻게 이제 부흥시킬 것인가 하는 거를 그 주변에 있는 국가들의 그 뭡니까 부흥 방법이라든가 이런 여러 가지 활동을 소개를 했습니다. 마지막으로 태국 마히돌 대학교에서 오신 이 타일랜드 발음은 참 어렵죠. 수미뜨라 쑤라랏데차 교수님을 소개합니다. 제목은 태국 청년들의 언어 문화 부흥사업 관여에 대하여라는 제목을 가지고 지금 12시 3분인데 12시 35분까지 발표를 하시겠습니다. 네.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kang, for the introduction, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank you, Dr. Kim, and the research centers, as well as other organizations and people who have invited me over. So it's an honor to be here, and I am here today to share my experience working with an ethnic group in Thailand, and I'm also very much looking forward to learning more about work that has been done on Jeju language. Okay, so the title of my talk today is Young People Engagement in Language and Cultural Revitalization in Thailand. So basically I work with people, younger people. Okay, and I've been working with different ethnic groups, mostly like Thai people in Sichuan and a comparative case in provinces in Thailand, and also the Black Thai people, which is the focus of my talk today. And recently I've started working on the revitalization of the Ryukyu languages in Okinawa Islands on Ikema and central Okinawa and Okino-Erabu and Yoron in Japan. Okay, this one is a ladder of participation, and it's actually, I have been working with the Black Thai community for like 10 years. Okay. Okay, I've been working with the Black Thai community for like 10 years, and then it's actually, I'm a sociolinguist, and it started from like this, like 2009 to 2013. It's more like a typical sociolinguistic work where we focused on the language attitudes, like language use, and cultural rights, linguistic rights, and yeah, that sort of thing. And that's when, okay. That's when we realized that there's a little problem here, because most of the people we saw involving in this language revitalization or just the language itself are mostly the elderly people. And what we found is that all of these people are actually, the project involved many different groups in Thailand, like about 20 communities in Thailand, different ethnic groups. But what we found so far was that all of them have this positive attitudes toward their language, but I mean, the literacy is actually very low. They don't speak it, and they don't know how to read or how to write sometimes. And the biggest problem is, oh, I'm sorry. The biggest problem is there's no successor. So younger generations do not take any part, an active part in the, speaking the language or any language activities. Okay. So and now we have these emerging questions about how can language revitalization and reclamation address the root causes of the language shift, and this is more importantly, how do we make young people interested in traditional language and culture? Like how do we engage them? Okay, and to what extent cultural preservation and reconstruction is compatible with adapting to new social environments, and how this impacts language development as well as strategies for revitalization. Okay, so today's talk, I'll be talking a little bit about the key terms, like the frameworks, like communities engagement and social impact, young people's participation, and then I'll focus on my previous project, not the current one, on PAR, or Participatory Action Research Project, which would cover the research objectives and the history of the people, and research design and findings. Okay, first, community engagement. And I mean, in Thailand, and I think also worldwide, the term engagement is like a keyword for research projects these days. And so in Thailand, we have this description of what it means by engagement. So there are 4 aspects of community engagement. So you can say that you have an engagement only when you have this partnership and mutual benefit, scholarship, and social impact. So partnership, basically it means that you have to partner up with the community people. So it's not only the linguists or the scholars working by themselves, but you have to partner up with the community people. And mutual benefit, the second one is like, everybody has to earn something from this, not just on the academic side, but also the community side too. And scholarship means that you have to learn from each other, exchanging knowledge and everything. So the linguists or the scholars are not the people who know everything. So we have to also learn from the local people. And last one is social impact. And okay, we define social impact as increased well-being, and which was discussed in Dr. Grenoble's presentation too. Okay, and there are different dimensions of well-being, and so my project focused on the subjective well-being, which is more on the psychological part of the well-being. Okay. So this is just to give a brief definition of the subjective well-being, which is basically feeling good, and it's personal perception and satisfactions. It reflects on not only individual preferences. So basically, it means feeling good about being yourself and being able to speak your language and do things, you know, like in your culture, like you used to. Okay, and research, a lot of research actually. Okay. Have shown that discrimination has negative influences on health and quality of life, and most common types of discrimination are based on race and ethnicity, gender, age, and appearance. And it has like this negative effects on subjective well-being of the people, including like anxiety, depression, psychological stress, happiness, and satisfaction with life. Okay, and previous work also found that language work have good effects on the better well-beings, and that's some references. And this is another framework that I use for my project, because working with younger people, we need this framework of what it means by participation with the younger people, and this is by UNICEF. And so you can see that participation with younger people means that younger people have the right to information and freedom of expression, association, or religion, and also they have the right to express views and have them given due weight. Basically, you have to respect the opinions and perspective of the younger people, and the bottom line is all young people can participate without discrimination on any grounds, whether they are marginalized or socially excluded or disadvantaged groups. So, and this is the framework for participation with younger people based on this CRC is the Convention on the Rights of the Child by UNICEF, 2018. And the participation has to be meaningful, and by that it means, okay, first, the space on the left, so it has to be safe, provide this safe and inclusive opportunity to form and express views for the local younger people. And voice, it means that expressions of views must be facilitated. So they can say things, and it must be facilitated in a medium of their choice. And also the audience, very importantly, that their view of the younger people must be listened to. So that you have to, older people or adults have to respect their views. And influence means that their view must be acted on, as appropriate. Okay. Now, that's the framework that I use, and so now I'll talk about my participatory action research project, or PAR project, with this Black Thai community in Thailand, and it discussed the active role of young people in processes of intergenerational transmission. The objective of the project is to reinforce the use of ethnic language and culture for conserving collective wisdom of the community and strengthen local community networks by encouraging the participation of all stakeholders. So we are working with different generations in the community now, and also different local governmental offices. And the most important objective that we have is to engage the young people. And this one is from UNICEF, like how we define different groups of children or youth or adolescents and stuff. So this is just to give you a reference of how it's defined. And I work with this group this group of young people since they were in, I work with elementary school, like high school, and also college students. So my group would fall into young people. But this framework, definition is by UNICEF and WHO. So the next question is why young people? Why do we need to engage them, right? So the answer is basically simply that they are the future. If you don't have the younger generation speaking the language, then there's nothing to save. Okay, and so this is the World Bank Development Report on the three-lens approach to youth participation. But I think you can use it for children or younger people too, or adolescents. And so you look at them as the the stakeholders and the partners and also the beneficiaries of the whole activity. Okay. And next, this is just to show where the black Thai people is, because this is the map of Thailand, and here in Bangkok, and the province I work with is in Phetchaburi province, and black Thai people I work with are in this district. It's a Khao Yai district, where it's actually the first settlement of the black Thai people who moved from Vietnam. Okay. Okay, I'll just put everything on. This is to give you a background of what is the social context of Thailand. And this is, Thailand is a hierarchical society, and this is the language status and the hierarchy of the language itself. So the prestigious one would be English, at the topmost, like world international language is in the highest hierarchy. And we have national language like Standard Thai, and we have regional languages like the Northeastern or the Northern dialect. And the ethnic languages would fall into these sub-regional languages. And what it means by this is that usually a language in the lower tier would be interested in learning the language of the higher tier and wouldn't be interested in learning the language of the lower tier. And so we are talking about here, this tier. And another characteristic of being in the lower tier is that usually it faces like stigma and discrimination. So another information, on Thailand context, that the country hasn't really officially recognized the existence of the different languages, in the country. Okay. And I'll go to this briefly. Black Thai people moved, originally they came from Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, and then they migrated through Laos and then come to Thailand, and they settled at the Phetchaburi province, and they migrated as captives of war, which means that their status was actually very low because they're captives of war. But sometimes black Thai people are referred to as Lao due to similar migration history, so sometimes they are misunderstood for being Lao instead of being black Thai. Okay, since they were captives of war, right? So there are negative connotations of suppression, insult, and disdain, just as they've been treated since the first arrival as captives of war. So I just would like to give you this information on their status in the wider society of Thailand. And next is the methodology, which is participatory action research, the one that I adopted in my previous project, and actually current one too. But anyway, so is an action research is a research that conducted for, with, and by the language speaking community, within which the research takes place. And so I will show this one to you. So okay, it's messed up, sorry. Anyway, we can look at this one here. So usually as a typical research project, so it would be the researchers in charge, would be the responsible person or in charge of everything, right? But PAR research is different. You work with the community, and so you do basically everything with the community people. So you start with, entry. When you enter and you look and you plan, act, observe, reflect, and evaluate and react. So all the steps you have to do it with the community people, and what you would have is actually you are cultivating or fostering like local researchers through the whole process. So entry, I'll just read it, is like networking. I think in Korean it's come out fine. And when you look, I did the SWOT analysis, is the strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat. And plan, we do what do we want to do? So we plan things with the local community. So basically I went there with my team, and then I told them that I have this mission, like we would like to pass down the local heritage to the younger generations. What do you want to do? And then we have a lot of discussion of what they want to do. And so then we work with like about 20 communities, but I was responsible for the black Thai people, and they chose museum because it has everything, and they can't choose because certain community chose like food or songs or music and stuff. But the black Thai people, they chose museum. And then we plan on how we're going to do this together. And observe is what impact do we have. So we talked a lot with the community and work with them. And reflect and evaluate is what do we want to do now. And react is what else do we want to do and how do we do it. So it's a cyclical process that you repeat it again and again. Okay. Maybe I should use this one. And this, it's a teamwork of the academic scholars and the local people. So we have community leaders, and so usually the elderly people. And we have youth leaders here, and members of the communities or other people. And we have researchers from different fields, because this is interdisciplinary research. This is not only linguistic, because when you because this is a PAR project. Most of the time we have these 20 communities. None of them chose language, okay? Yeah, so they would choose something else, and so it requires experts from different fields to work together. And also local government agencies and school teachers, and we have temple, okay. Okay, and my previous project was a 3-year project, and we have different goals. The first one is to network with the community and choose the local heritage. And so they chose this, just one, we call it like learning unit or learning center, we call it learning unit. And it was the museum. And so the second year we expanded to include a wider community to build a sense of ownership, because usually when something takes place at just the museum or someone's house or just this one particular community leader, other people think that it's not their business. They didn't, earn anything, or it's not, it's basically not their business. And so that is to include other people. What we did was first we focused on the museum. When we expanded, we asked the kids to explore and then write a map of this linguistic and cultural heritage in their community. And so we come up with this map of the different learning units in the community. And the last one is to add the commercial value to the traditional value. So basically trying to think of products that come out of their heritage. And this is actually the question given to us by the national policy. Yeah. Okay. And next would be some pictures. Okay, what we did with the kids is that since this is a museum, so it contains all the information about their ways of life. And so it would have information on, say, a lot of things like weaving, basketry, like their costumes and their hairstyles, a lot of things. And so in order to work with kids, the bottom line is you have to let them do what they want. So do what you love and love what you do. And so the kids get to choose what they want to work on. And so we divide the kids into different groups. And so some group would choose like weaving, and that's the weaving of the end of the skirt. And this is like storytelling about the goddess of rice, or basketry, or embroidery. And we have a lot of kids activity, fun activities to get them involved and excited and interested in these fun activities. And they get to make, this is about the pillow embroidery. And the kids make this, what information that was here was where you can find it and who made it, and stuff like that. Okay, and this is the toy, the traditional toy in the Black Thai culture, and also the basketry of the, good. Okay. Okay, that's a pillow I talked about, the embroidery of the pillow. And next one I will show you a video. It's actually a good summary of my project, and on the 3-year project we have. It's a documentary by Mahidol University. So can you? Ethnic group is a social group, a group of people who identify with each other based on social and ancestral experiences or language and cultural traditions. Our concern is the loss of traditional knowledge. We are talking about both language and culture. So we are talking about the loss of local knowledge or local wisdom, or language attrition, language shift, or even language death. It is our concern because when languages become extinct, there are adverse effects on the linguistic and cultural diversity, resulting in the irreplaceable loss for the whole of mankind. And so we are trying to help the community passing on the local heritage.
ไทยทรงดำคือไทยดำที่อพยพมาจากเวียดนามเมื่อสมัยพระเจ้ากรุงธนบุรี230กว่าปีเราก็ภาคภูมิกับไทยทรงดำเสน่ห์เราก็คิดว่าเป็นภาษาพูดภาษาเขียนทรงผมที่อยู่อาศัยและพิธีกรรมกฎเกณฑ์สังคมที่วางไว้รัดกุมแล้วก็เหมาะสมกับการสมัยแต่ว่าเดี๋ยวนี้ก็ว่าเป็นแต่เพียงตำนาน
The Research Institute of Language and Cultures of Asia have been working with different ethnic communities all over Thailand for decades, and at one point of time we noticed that the local people, the community members who were working with us, they're mostly the elder members of the community, and so we started thinking like what if there is no successors or the next generations who are going to inherit or to pass on this deeply rooted knowledge or local wisdom. So we started thinking about an action research where we involve or actively engage all generations of the community members in developing or working on something or toward keeping the local wisdom alive.
Then our research team analyzed the data, studied and planned for the development of Thai Songdam's identity, preservation, and maintenance. We focused on the development of the existing Phan Thanom Museum and then expanded it to the broader community. The process was divided into 3 phases. The first phase included the renovation of the museum, re-establishing it as an important learning resource.
Phan Thanom Museum is the learning center or learning unit. It's actually the first one because it's the first time that this community gets to work on an action research. So we started from just one learning unit or learning center, and the community chose Phan Thanom Museum.
Once the museum renovation was completed as planned, we moved to the second phase, which was to develop the community as a large learning resource center. We aimed for Thai Songdam to become a learning community because their identity and value are not only in the museum.
But during the second year, we expand this idea or this concept to a wider community to create a sense of belonging, a sense of ownership for the whole community. So we have different learning units. So basically there are actually different houses in that community where these wise persons live. So by working with us, we create these opportunities for them to say work as a local guide and also to learn about each part of the local wisdom of their choice. So they get to choose to learn about things of their own interest. They can tell other people or share this knowledge with other people. By initiating this kind of participatory action research, we try to involve and engage the youth members. So we involve them from the very beginning by planning. So they have this chance to discuss their opinions with the elder members of the committee and also researchers. And so they took a more active role in everything. They help each other or the committee in making decisions of, or making directions of where we are going and how we are going to plan things and how we are going to implement our plans. So the youth members are involved in all these steps, and so they get to learn how to work together in a research project. So during the process, we actually, one of the activities that we had was to draw this cultural map and also to make a brochures of the objects or the artifacts or the local wisdom of their interest. And so in order to get that information, they have to go elicit the information from the local wise people. So they have to go to different houses and by locating them and then talk to these people, and usually these people are actually their own grandparents or parents or aunts and uncles or their neighbors.
Once the community was well aware of their inherited cultural value, then the third phase was to further increase their commercial value.
What we do is we ask them to think about how to add the commercial value to the traditional value without, say, destroying what we already have. So the committee members get to think together about what kind of product they want to represent their own identity, something that they can make a product out of their own local wisdom, and maybe they can generate income to the community by working with us.
ตั้งแต่มีทีมวิจัยเข้ามาเป็นที่ปรึกษาก็ทำให้คนในชุมชนแล้วก็เยาวชนเห็นถึงอัตลักษณ์ของตนเองตัวเองมีความภาคภูมิใจที่ได้เป็นคนไทยทรงดำค่ะเราอยากจะนำเสนอสิ่งที่เป็นไทยทรงดำของเราให้กับคนภายนอกได้รู้จักมากขึ้นค่ะ
This action research also created a model and good practices which can develop the youth and the community to fully cultivate their own distinct ethnic identity.
This kind of action research aims at community development. A small scale but very powerful is its impact. It could be used as a model of community development anyway. This key factor is the active participation and engagement for the local community.
This kind of project is very good for the community because we restore this lost tie and strengthen the relationship between generations and make them stronger. And we believe that we need more of this kind of research to make the community stronger for sustainable development in the future. Okay, can I have my slide back, please? I only have a few minutes. No, I need to do the conclusion. They already said stop. Okay. Can I have the slide back, please? Okay. So this is the outcome of I'll just take a few minutes to make a conclusion, that this is the ladder of participation, and it starts from non-participation to different degrees of participation. So here is basically, there's 8 rungs of participation, and the first one started with the children are told what to do. So basically they are not really active or anything. And then the top one is that young people initiate the projects by themselves. So basically they run the project, and the adults work as facilitator or work together with adults, but children are in charge. And from here, when my project started on the 6th, because this is adult initiated, right? And then working with the kids, and you can look at the reference later on how things work. And a few years later, we measure success by looking at the 8th rung, which is children, young people initiated the project. So these youth leaders, youth groups that we work with, they wrote a proposal and submitted for a grant, and it was granted. And the project that we worked with was to work on the reading and the writing of the Black Thai language. And which is now, and then next year they write another proposal, which is to collect the stories and stories of the Black Thai people. Okay, So that's our success. And this is also the most of participation. So ranging from like no participation to adolescent participation. So the 8th round would be here. So that's when the kids started the project by themselves and we help as a facilitator. And they control like the outcome and the processes. And I will skip this and somehow it's not going. Here, oops, sorry. Can I have the previous one? Okay, here. Okay, just the final one is that without the committee participation and willingness, then revitalization of communities' language and culture is basically impossible. So it's very important that we work with the committee people and that we work with them by research team. In my project, research team mean us and the local people, not just us. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
예, 감사합니다. 지금까지 타일랜드 마히돌 대학교에서 오신 수미뜨라 쑤라랏데차. It's very difficult.
I know, sorry.
예, 아마 이제 그 태국의 블랙타이 쪽의 언어들을 갖다가 보존하기 위해서 이제 청년들이 관여하는 그 방법과 그 다음에 이거를 이제 사회 문화 언어 이란 측면에서 이제 프로젝트를 본인이 하는 것 같습니다. 본인이 출연하는 동영상까지 마련을 해주셔서 시간이 조금 많이 지났습니다. 지금까지 참을성 있게 관심을 가지고 이렇게 외국어로 하는 그 이 재미없는 그렇지만 꼭 우리가 듣고 우리 제주 방언을 보존하는 방안까지도 함께 생각해 볼 수 있는 그러한 논문들이었습니다. 여기에 대해서 아까 말씀드린 대로 의문점이 있거나 또는 코멘트가 있거나 또는 우리에게 어떤 암시를 주는 이야기가 있다면 점심 식사를 하시고 그 다음에 제2분과에서 발표를 또 들으시고 난 다음에 종합 토론 시간에 그때까지 계셔서 함께 이야기를 나눠보면 좋겠습니다. 자, 이것으로 이제 제1분과 발표회를 모두 마치겠습니다. 감사합니다.
지금까지 진행을 해주신 강정희 교수님과 그리고 세 분의 주제 발표자들께 뜨거운 박수로 한 번 더 부탁드리겠습니다.